As the ocean levels keep rising, people in Boston have more reason to worry about flooding. That's one reason for a community open house January 12th with officials from the city and the Federal Emergency Management Administration, or FEMA. The event will take place in Dorchester at the Boston Teachers Union Hall in Columbia Point, but it's recommended for residents of Charlestown, East Boston, South Boston, the North End, downtown, the West End, Dorchester, and Fort Point. To tell us about the event is the Commissioner of the city's Environment Department, Carl Spector. Thank you very much for being with us, Carl.
Chris, it's a pleasure to be here.
This is one more example of the climate change concern, but the kind of flood zones that we're talking about, this is not about what's going to happen eventually. This is about the way things are right now.
That's correct. The new maps that have come out have nothing to do with sea level rise that we're expecting to occur over the next century. It is a reflection of the current risk and the current understanding of the risk of flooding under the conditions of sea level rise and storm frequency and storm intensity that we have right now.
Now, within my last decade or two, I remember things in the Fenway, Morrissey Boulevard in Dorchester, but there are some other people in these neighborhoods that are saying, we haven't had a big flood around here, so what's the big deal?
Well, the big deal is that we never know when the really big flood will occur. The flood maps that come out show what's called the special flood hazard areas in the city of Boston. These are areas where there is a 1% chance in any given year of a flood occurring. So on average, if conditions don't change, we would expect the floods to occur once every 100 years, but there's a chance they can occur any year. They can also occur 2 years in a row, even though there's a low probability of that. And we want people to be aware of the risks that they are facing and the steps that they can take to ensure the safety of their families, the health of their businesses, and all the requirements that go along with that.
Now, these flood zones are drawn up by the federal government, by FEMA, and they came out with some boundaries a couple of years ago. And the city thought that maybe they went too far. And what's happened since then?
Well, that's correct. The proposed flood maps came out 2 years ago. We were concerned about the accuracy of those flood maps because of the changes in the number of residential units and the number of businesses that would be affected by them. So we went out and we got some expert help and we reviewed the data that FEMA used, we reviewed the models that they had used to calculate the flood zones, and we submitted an appeal which reduced the size of the increase. FEMA accepted that, and now there's an agreement on what those flood boundaries should be. The final maps are still an increase over the previous flood maps in the number of businesses and homes that are affected, but it's a smaller increase.
Well, regardless what happens with the climate or the weather, if you own some property in one of these zones, you're probably going to hear something from your lender, right?
That's correct. Mortgages that have federal backing, and there are a variety of mortgages of that type, will require that the holders of those mortgages get flood insurance. We also want to suggest that homeowners who don't have that requirement also consider getting flood insurance, even if they're not required to. And furthermore, just because someone isn't in the flood zone as it's currently drawn doesn't mean that there's no risk of flooding. You know, the flooding can occur beyond the barrier. There's actually a substantial proportion of the claims that go to the National Flood Insurance Programs that come from homes and businesses that are not within the flood map. So individuals and families and businesses do need to make those decisions on their own. It should not be automatic by any chance, and we want to make sure through the open house and the other information that's available on the FEMA website or that's available through the City of Boston website, we want to make sure that the residents of Boston and the businessmen and women of Boston have an opportunity to get the resources and the information that they need to evaluate the steps that they should take with the new information.
Maybe the most automatic thing is that you have to carry enough flood insurance to cover what's left of your mortgage. But on the other hand, if you own property and you're trying to recover, you get to think of maybe what's it going to cost to replace what you've lost.
That's correct. And obviously, as I said, that's an individual decision or a family decision or a business's decision about how much coverage to get. But even more than that, it's not just a matter of insurance. We want to make sure that people have the information about the steps that they can take to reduce the vulnerability, to reduce the amount of damage that might happen to their property or to their family or to their health as a result of this. There are many steps such as waterproofing or moving critical equipment or protecting your valuable papers that anyone can take that will reduce the amount of damage of all kinds that occur in a flood. And we want to make sure that people in Boston have this information so that they can take the appropriate steps for them.
Equipment, we're talking about maybe heating systems, for example?
Yes, for example, if you have a boiler or a furnace in the basement and you are replacing that piece of equipment just because of the ordinary turnover that we all do with the equipment in our houses or our businesses, you might want to consider where is it located, or can it be elevated, or could it be put in a slightly safer location? But that's one example. There are many, many steps, and there are many, many options, and we advise anyone in the flood zone or anyone even near a flood zone to think about these possibilities and determine what's right.
Here's another thing that comes to mind here. I mean, we can't expect people to build seawalls, but on the other hand, if you own a house with a yard, there might be certain kinds of vegetation that you might try to put in there to maybe absorb some of the water coming in, perhaps?
Well, if there's a major flood, with several feet of water, that's not going to do it. But if it's a matter of shaping the lawn so that relatively minor amounts of flooding don't find the way to your house, to your bulkhead door, or a window or something like that may be possible. We want to encourage what we call green infrastructure in the Environment Department, a fancy way of saying flowers and plants and trees to be planted all around Boston, because it does absorb the water and cools the city during a heat wave, and so it has lots and lots of benefits. So again, there are many, many options, from planting trees and flowers and bushes to building things to protect yourself that can be happen. Furthermore, the city is always evaluating what it should be doing at a larger scale. Do we need to change the culverts under roads? And the Boston Water and Sewer Commission is doing a lot of work evaluating how the stormwater system is working, and whether there do need to be bigger seawalls or things like that.
And of course, this is a meeting that should also be important for people who want to develop properties in these neighborhoods as well. We should mention this is going to be on the 12th of January, and the time is what, 4 to 7? 4 to 7
at the Boston Teachers Union Hall on Mount Vernon Street in Dorchester. That's correct.
And by the way, there is information online about these new boundaries, so people can check that out too?
Yes, people can go to floodsmart.gov, which is a FEMA website. Similar information or links to the FEMA website are on the City of Boston's website too. So there's lots of information available, and we strongly encourage people to go get it or to come to the community open house.
Thank you very much for being with us, the Commissioner of the City's Environment Department.
Chris, my pleasure.
Carl Spector. Still to come, an opportunity for businesses owned by women and people of color, but first, this message.